They told me my fences were ruining the view, so I took them down. And then I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, and watched the wind erase their entire neighborhood like it had been waiting years for permission. Now, I don't usually tell stories like this, because most of the time, life out here is pretty quiet. Just wind, snow, and the kind of silence you only get when you're miles away from anyone who thinks they can improve you. But this one stuck with me. Not because I was right, but because I knew exactly how it would end, and nobody else wanted to listen. I live on a ridge, outside a little town called Red Hollow, Montana. Not the postcard kind of place either. More like a stretch of land where the wind doesn't visit, it lives. It howls through here year-round, but in winter, it turns mean. Snow doesn't fall politely out here. It comes in sideways, sharp and fast, like it's got something to prove. I bought my place about 25 years ago, back when land was cheap, and nobody cared what you did as long as you kept to yourself. It's nothing fancy, just a small cabin, a barn, and a long stretch of pasture that slopes down toward the main road. And that road, that's important, because it's the only way in or out of a development they built about 10 years ago, just downhill from me. Pinarest Estates, that's what they named it, which always made me laugh a little, because there aren't any pines, and it sure as hell isn't cresting anything except the bottom of my hill. Now, when they first started building those houses, I didn't think much of it. Folks move in, folks move out. That's life. But what they didn't understand, what nobody bothered to ask about, was how winter behaves on this ridge. See, for over 2 decades, I'd maintained a line of snow fences along the north edge of my property. Nothing pretty, just rough wooden slats wired between steel posts, weathered gray from years of wind and ice. If you didn't know what they were for, you'd probably think I was just hoarding scrap lumber. But those fences, they were the only reason that road stayed open. They worked by breaking the wind just enough so the snow would drop early, settling into my pasture instead of blowing straight down into that dip where the road sits. It's not magic, just physics. Something you learn quick when you've spent enough winters digging yourself out of mistakes. I didn't build them for the neighbors. Hell, when I put the first ones up, there weren't any neighbors to think about. I built them because I got tired of losing half my land to drifting snow every year. But over time, they ended up protecting more than just me, and for a while, nobody complained. In fact, a couple of the earlier homeowners even stopped by once or twice, brought over beer, asked about the fences. I explained it to them, showed them how the drifts formed, how the wind moved. They got it. You could see it in their faces. That moment when something clicks, and suddenly the land makes sense. But people change, and neighborhoods change faster. About 3 years ago, a new HOA board took over Pinecrest. Fresh faces, new energy, a whole lot of confidence. You could tell right away they had plans, the kind that usually look good on paper and fall apart the second they meet reality. The new president was a woman named Carol Whitaker, mid-50s, always dressed like she had somewhere more important to be, even when she didn't. She moved in from Arizona, which in hindsight should have been my first clue. First time I met her, she was standing at the edge of my fence line, hands on her hips, squinting at the wood slats like they'd personally offended her. She didn't wave, didn't introduce herself, just said, "Are these yours?" I remember leaning on my shovel, looking at her for a second, trying to decide what kind of conversation this was going to be. "Yeah," I said, "they've been there a while." She nodded slowly like she was filing that away for later. "Well, they're not exactly attractive." I almost laughed, but I held it in. "They're not supposed to be." That was the first crack. A week later I got a letter. Official letterhead, legal language, the whole thing. It said my fences were in violation of a visual corridor agreement and were negatively impacting property values within Pinarest Estates. Gave me 14 days to remove them or face fines and possible legal action. I read it twice, then set it down on the table and just sat there for a while, listening to the wind outside, thinking, "You've got to be kidding me." So I did what any reasonable person would do. I went to their HOA meeting. Now I don't do meetings, never have. But I figured if I showed up, explained things face to face, maybe we could avoid something stupid. The meeting was held in their little clubhouse. Nice building, big windows, all facing out toward my land. Ironically enough, there were about a dozen people there sitting in folding chairs, sipping coffee like this was just another item on the agenda. Carol was at the front, of course, running the show. When it was my turn to speak, I brought everything I could think of. Weather records, photos from past winters, even a couple diagrams I'd sketched out, showing how the wind patterns worked across the ridge. I kept it simple. Those fences, I told them, they're not for looks. They're there to stop snow from drifting onto your access road. Without them, the wind's going to carry everything straight down into that low point by your entrance. One guy in the back nodded like he understood. Carol didn't. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. That tight smile people use when they've already made up their mind. "We appreciate your concern," she said, dragging that word out just a little. "But we have snow removal services, professional ones. We won't be needing your structures." There was a murmur around the room, a few people agreeing, a few looking unsure. I tried again. "It's not about clearing snow," I said. "It's about where it ends up in the first place. Once it starts piling in that dip, you're not pushing it out. You're citing the wind, and the wind always wins up here." She gave a short laugh. Not mean exactly, just dismissive. "I think we'll take our chances." And just like that, the decision was made. I remember walking out of that meeting into the cold night air, the wind cutting across the ridge, and thinking they have no idea what they just asked for. But they'd made it clear. So, I complied. I complied. Not out of spite, at least not at first. I've lived long enough to know that arguing with people who've already decided you're wrong is like shoveling snow in a blizzard. You just end up tired, and the drift comes right back. That weekend I got to work. Ground was already starting to harden. That early winter bite settling in, the kind that turns dirt into something closer to concrete. I hauled out my tools, bundled up, and started pulling posts one by one. Each one fought me on the way out, like it didn't want to leave. Like even the fence knew this was a bad idea. Took me 2 full days. By Sunday afternoon, the whole line was gone. Just open land, stretching clean across the ridge. Nothing to catch the wind anymore. No resistance, no interruption. Just a straight shot from the north, all the way down to that road. I stood there for a while when I finished, hands on my hips, looking out over it. It looked nice, I guess. Clean, unobstructed, useless. Right about then, I heard a car coming up the road behind me. Slow, deliberate. I didn't even have to turn around to know who it was. Carol. She rolled down her window as she pulled up, smiling like we'd just completed some kind of joint project. "Well," she said, glancing out over the empty stretch, "that's much better." I nodded once. "Sure is something." She gave me a thumbs up like I passed inspection, then drove off without another word. And that was that. For about 2 weeks, nothing happened. Cold settled in, sure, but no major storms. Just light dustings, the kind that makes everything look pretty, but doesn't cause trouble. I went about my routine, splitting wood, checking the barn, keeping an eye on the forecast the way I always do this time of year. And the forecast started to shift. You get a feel for it after a while. It's not just what the weather says, it's how it says it. The pressure drops a certain way. The wind changes tone. The sky gets that flat, heavy look, like it's holding its breath. I saw it coming 3 days out. Not a historic storm. Nothing that would make the news. Just a solid Wyoming-style blizzard. Steady snowfall, strong sustained winds, maybe some gusts pushing 50, 60 miles per hour. The kind of storm we get every year. The kind my fences had handled without issue for decades. I remember standing in my kitchen that morning, coffee in hand, listening to the first low howl of wind slipping around the corners of the house, and thinking, this is it. By noon, the snow started. At first, it was light, almost gentle, drifting down in small flakes. If you didn't know better, you might have thought it would stay that way. It didn't. By mid-afternoon, the wind picked up fast and steady, pushing the snow sideways across the ridge, in long, thin sheets. You couldn't really see individual flakes anymore, just movement, white streaks racing across the land like something alive. And with nothing to stop it, it kept going. I stepped out onto the porch around 3, pulled my coat tight, and looked down toward the road. At that point, it was still visible, just a narrow strip cutting through the land, but I could already see it starting that subtle buildup where the terrain dips. That's where it always starts. Not dramatic at first, just a little extra accumulation, a few inches more than the surrounding ground. Easy to ignore if you don't know what comes next. By 4, the wind was howling, real howling now, the kind that rattles windows and makes you lean into it just to stay upright. Gusts were hitting hard, pushing snow and dense waves straight across the ridge. And that dip, it started filling fast. I watched it happen in real time, standing there like I'd seen it 100 times before, except this time there was nothing in the way. No fence to break the wind, no early drop to spread the snow out across my pasture. It all just funneled down, not buried completely yet, but you could barely make out where it had been. The drift had already climbed a couple feet, soft and uneven, still shifting with every gust. That's when I saw the first set of headlights. Someone trying to get in. The truck slowed as it approached the entrance, probably realizing too late what they were dealing with. It made it maybe halfway through the drift before the wheels started spinning. I could almost hear it from where I stood, that hollow whine of tires losing grip. They rocked it back and forth a few times, trying to push through. Didn't work. Eventually the door opened and a guy stepped out, leaning into the wind, looking around like maybe the situation would make more sense if he saw it from outside the truck. It didn't. He stood there for a minute, then climbed back in, reversed slowly, and backed away from the entrance. That was the last vehicle I saw make the attempt that day. By 6, the drift was over 5 feet high, and it wasn't loose anymore. That's the part people don't understand. With enough wind, snow doesn't stay soft. It packs down, layer by layer, compressing into something dense and heavy, almost like concrete. Once that happens, you're not just moving snow, you're trying to break through it. The subdivision lights started flicking on as dusk settled in. Little warm glows behind windows that probably still felt safe at that point. Inside, I imagine people were checking weather apps, maybe talking about how bad it looked, maybe trusting that their plow service would handle it in the morning. I stayed on the porch a little longer than I needed to. Not out of enjoyment, just watching. There's a difference. By 8, the wind hadn't let up. If anything, it got worse. Snow kept coming, relentless, piling higher and tighter into that same spot. The drift grew upward and outward, sealing off the entrance completely. No road, no path, just a wall. Sometime around 9, I saw flashing lights in the distance. Their plow. It came in slow, pushing against the wind, blade down, engine working hard. For a second, I thought, maybe they'll manage it. The plow hit the drift, and the front end lifted, just slightly like it had run into something solid. It pushed or tried to. Snow sprayed out to the sides, but the main body of the drift didn't move. The blade kept catching, the tires spinning underneath, struggling for traction. I could tell what was coming before it happened. The plow lurched once, twice, then it stopped, stuck. The engine kept revving for a bit, then dropped, like even it knew the fight was over. I let out a slow breath, watching the flashing lights blink against the whiteout, and felt that strange mix of emotions settle in. Part frustration, part validation, and something else I didn't really want to name, because the truth was, this didn't have to happen. By that point, there wasn't really anything left to wonder about. It had played out exactly the way I knew it would, and that's the part that sat the heaviest. Not the storm, not the damage, but the fact that none of it was surprising. I went back inside, shut the door against the wind, and let the quiet settle in again. Threw another log on the fire, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and just stood there for a minute, listening to the house creak the way it always does when a storm leans into it. Out here, You learn to respect that sound. It means the world outside is doing what it's always done, and you'd better be ready for it. Sometime later that night, probably close to midnight, my phone rang. Now I don't get a lot of calls after dark. Most folks around here know better, unless it's important. So when I saw the number, I already had a pretty good idea who it was. I let it ring once, twice, then I picked up. Hello. At first all I heard was wind, muffled, but still there, bleeding through the line. Then her voice came in, tight, strained. Nothing like the calm confidence she carried at those meetings. Is this Daniel? Yeah, I said. It is. This is Carol from Pinehurst. I figured. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough to feel like she was choosing her next words carefully. Or maybe just trying to keep them together. I glanced out the window, where the snow was still driving sideways past the glass. Yeah, I said quietly. I imagine you do. Her breath hitched just a little. The road is completely blocked. Our plow is stuck. We've got residents who can't get out. We've got someone who needs medication delivered in the morning. And she stopped herself, then pushed forward, voice sharper now. We need you to fix this. I leaned back against the counter, cradling the phone between my shoulder and ear, eyes still on the storm. Fix it, Howell. You need to put the fences back up, she said like it was obvious. That's what you said they were for. I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because of how simple she made it sound. Carol, the ground's frozen solid, I said, and there's a blizzard outside. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't get those posts back in tonight. Her voice cracked then, the frustration finally breaking through. This is your fault. And there it was, not fear, not responsibility, blame. I closed my eyes for a second, letting that settle. No, I said, calm, steady. This is exactly what I told you would happen. You should have refused, she snapped. You knew this was dangerous. I tried, I said. At your meeting with your board, you made it clear what you wanted. There was silence on the line, but not the quiet kind, the kind filled with everything she didn't want to admit. Then softer now, almost pleading. People are stuck. Daniel. I nodded to myself, even though she couldn't see it. I know, and I did. That's the part folks might not like hearing, but it's true. I knew exactly what was happening down there. I knew there were families sitting in their homes, watching that drift grow, realizing too late that they weren't getting out anytime soon. I knew the anxiety, the frustration, the creeping worry as hours turned into something longer. But I also knew something else. This wasn't a problem you could fix in the middle of the night with a shovel and good intentions. They've got the equipment for this kind of thing. That's not soon enough, she said quickly. We need access now. You're not getting it tonight, I replied. Not harsh, just honest. Nobody is. Another long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, smaller. What are we supposed to do? I looked out at the storm one more time, then back at the fire. Stay put, I said. Keep your heat on. Check on your neighbors. Ride it out. It wasn't what she wanted to hear, but it was the only answer there was. We hung up not long after that, and the storm, it just kept going. Morning came slow, the kind of gray, heavy light that doesn't so much rise as it just appears. Wind had eased a little, but the damage was already done. I stepped outside early, boots crunching down on the packed snow, and walked out to the ridge. From up there, you could see everything. And what I saw was a wall, not a drift anymore, not something you could mistake for a temporary inconvenience. This was solid, 12 feet high in some places, stretched across the entire entrance, like the land itself had decided to close the door. No tracks, no gaps, just white, dense, and immovable. Down below, I could see people moving around, small figures against the snow. Some gathered near where the road used to be, others just standing, looking at it like maybe it would disappear if they stared long enough. It didn't. Around mid-morning, the county crews showed up. Not the usual trucks either. They brought in a rotary snowblower, big machine, the kind they use up in mountain passes when avalanches block the roads. That alone told you how serious it was. It took them hours. I watched most of it from a distance, leaning against the fence line where my post used to be, hands tucked into my jacket, just observing. The machine chewed into the drift slowly, carving out a tunnel instead of clearing it, sending arcs of snow high into the air as it worked its way through, piece by piece, foot by foot, until finally, sometime in the afternoon, there was a path again, narrow, rough, but open. Emergency vehicles went in first, then a slow trickle of cars. People finally able to leave after being stuck for nearly 3 days. 3 days. All because of a decision made in a warm room by people who didn't understand what they were up against. I heard later what it cost. $15,000. Billed straight to the HOA. Funny how the view doesn't seem quite as important after that. Spring came eventually, like it always does. Snow melted, ground softened, and life started creeping back into the land. And one afternoon, I heard a knock on my door. I already knew who it was before I opened it. Carol stood there, along with 2 other board members. No clipboard this time, no confident posture, just people, humbled. "Daniel," she said, her voice careful now, measured in a way it hadn't been before. "We like to talk." I stepped aside, let them in. We sat at the table where that letter had once been. For a moment, nobody said anything. Then she took a breath. We were wrong. Simple words, but they carried weight. I nodded once. Yeah, she didn't argue that. We didn't understand. One of the others added about the wind, the snow. "I know," I said. Carol leaned forward slightly. "We'd like you to rebuild the fences." There it was, full circle. I could have said yes right then, could have gone back out, put everything up the way it was, and let life return to normal. But some things you don't just reset. "I will," I said slowly, "but not the way it was before." They exchanged a quick glance. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I continued, "if I'm going to build them again, it's going to be official, written into your HOA agreements as permanent safety infrastructure. No more letters." Carol nodded almost immediately. "Of course." And I added, "I'm not doing it for free this time." That part they hesitated on, just for a second. Then she gave a small, tight smile. "That's fair. We worked out the details over the next couple weeks. Contracts, permissions, everything in writing this time. No assumptions, no misunderstandings. By early summer, the fences were back, stronger, better placed, built with a few improvements I'd learned over the years. And when winter came again, the snow hit, the wind howled, and the drift, it stopped right where it was supposed to. Never made it to the road. As for Carol, she moved out before the next snowfall. Back to Arizona. I heard guess the view wasn't worth it after all. Now, I've told this story a few times, and people always ask the same thing. Do you feel bad? And the truth is, I don't know. I didn't cause the storm. I didn't force the decision, but I also didn't stop it. Not when I knew exactly what was coming. So, I'll leave that part up to you. Was it just consequences, or something more? Let me know what you think. And if you've ever seen a situation where someone ignored experience and paid the price for it, go ahead and share that too. Because out here, nature doesn't argue.